We are live. Oh, sorry.
Greetings, everybody. If you wouldn't mind for waiting for just 1 minute, we're just waiting for one panelist to arrive, so he will be here momentarily. Joining us today, it really is a pleasure to be here with you all, particularly with co-hosting this event with ICLEI USA. I'm Cecilia Martinez. I am the Chief for Environmental and Climate Justice at the Bezos Earth Fund. I don't take that title lightly. As many of you know, it's been domestically in the US, it's been quite a journey to try and get equity and justice into the climate agenda. We're super excited that I believe we have turned that corner. And we're continuing to try and figure out what the best pathways are to ensure that equitable and just solutions are across the board in terms of our philanthropic giving, but also how we can complement and how we can support those of you who are actually working in the field, working on programs, working on solutions, how we can be supportive to you in addressing climate in an equitable and just way. We have today a great panel that represents an initiative that we have launched at the Bezos Earth Fund. It's called Greening America's Cities, and we are extremely excited that it is a $400 million commitment through 2030 to build green spaces across this country in the most vulnerable areas of the country in a way that will address the issues that the most vulnerable communities in this country are facing. And we're very lucky to have with us panelists today who are leaders in this field. We have with us Ms. Sandra Smithers from Delaware. She is a grantee of the Bezos Earth Fund. Her and her organization are doing incredible work. And if you want to sort of know why Delaware is so important in this country, our current president, President Biden, that has Wilmington, Delaware as his home. So we're thrilled that Ms. Smithers and her organization has been a grantee of the Bezos Earth Fund. We also have Anton Seals from Greater Englewood in Chicago. Again, a major city with incredible historical issues in terms of inequity and inequality, but is working really hard in his community with a whole team of people to be able to make these communities thriving, sustainable, and equitable. We are also incredibly lucky to have leading mayors who are leading efforts in green spaces and equity across the country. So with us, we have Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway from Madison, Wisconsin. Welcome, Mayor Conway. Near and dear to my heart, I lived in the Midwest for probably 30 years and visited Madison many times, a wonderful city, and she will share exciting things that are happening. We also have with us Mayor Eric Simmons from Greenville, Mississippi, who's going to share a lot about some really interesting things that the mayor is doing in collaboration with other mayors along the Mississippi Valley. But without further ado, what I would like to do is introduce our CEO, Andrew Steer, who will present some opening remarks for us on behalf of the Earth Fund.
Thank you, Cecilia, and welcome everybody. What a fabulous panel. So I will be brief because people didn't come to hear me, they came to hear you. The last 10 years have been an astonishing time for learning about the importance of nature in cities. Who said trees need to live only in rural areas? And who said that rich people should have a lot more trees and green space than poor people? But actually, they do. And this is a major, major issue of environmental justice. In the United States, we talk about food deserts, don't we? Well, there are tree and green space deserts as well. As a result, health is significantly lower and affected. Air pollution is not cleaned up the way that green spaces can do and trees can do in particular. And most important, perhaps of all, the temperatures are so much higher in inner city areas where there are no green spaces. They can be up to 10 degrees higher. And the scientists tell us that with climate change, we are now seeing year after year after year, heat being the #1 cause of death caused by climate change. And up to 100,000 deaths a year are expected by 2100. The best way of dealing with that is by bringing greenness into areas that are affected. If you have the right kind of tree near your house, your cooling bills can fall by 50%. It's quite astonishing. But in addition to all of the sort of physical aspects, there are actually mental aspects as well. Fascinating research has been done recently on issues even such as school test scores. There is something about having green spaces and trees and bushes and places to play. And as you walk to school, you actually see part of nature that actually affects your brain and makes your cognitive skills stronger. So there are so many ways. And now there's studies, as you know, that actually show that you live longer if you have trees. An amazing Canadian study showed that if when you walk out your front door, there are 7 trees. They did this astonishing study. I can't even believe it's true, quite frankly. 7 trees within eyesight, serious trees that is, you actually live something like 3 years longer. I mean, it's truly amazing. There is something to do with a peaceful communion with nature. You know, God gave us nature for a purpose. And there's no reason at all why those who live in disadvantaged areas should have any less of that than anybody else. So we are thrilled to be partners with some of the wonderful people here. And so as Cecilia said, the Bezos Earth Fund is focused on nature and climate, but everything we do has a sort of social and environmental equity lens. And this is just such a perfect example. And some people say, my goodness me, you're putting $400 million into greening America's cities. What does that have to do with climate change? Well, quite a lot, and I don't need to tell you why. So let's get on with the panel. Thank you, Cecilia. I hope everybody knows Cecilia Martinez. She's very modest. She probably didn't introduce herself in a very strong way. She came to us from the White House, where she was leading the work on Justice 40, and what a brilliant, brilliant program that is, and comes with an unbelievable background. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. And so what we're going to do today is we have an excellent blend. We have leadership from cities who are tackling this problem. We have community members who have been tackling this problem as well for quite some time. And as our CEO, Andrew, has articulated, the research is now catching up with what communities have known for quite some time, and that is that these green spaces and these natural spacers do make a big difference in people's lives. So I am going to turn first to Mayor Rhodes Conway. And I would like to ask the question of you, Mayor. How is your city ensuring equitable access to nature and green spaces? And what are some of the challenges, but also opportunities that you see going into the future for Madison?
Well, thank you so much. And let me start by just saying thanks to the organizers. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be talking about this really important topic. And I want to thank you guys for joining us, too. It's great to be on the panel with all of you. And this is maybe, 3 or 4 that we've done? So my name is Satya Rhodes Conway, and I'm the mayor of Madison, Wisconsin. I also have the honor of being the chair of climate mayors in the U.S. And I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about the importance of nature-based solutions in the climate context. And this is something that Madison has been working on really for a long time. And I'd like to think we've had some success. There's also some real challenges in this space. So just a brief overview of some of the things that we're working on, and maybe I can then articulate some of the challenges. Like many cities, but not all, we do control our parks, and I'm very, very proud that 95% of Madison residents live within a 10-minute walk of a park in our community. That's a pretty good number. We wish it was 100. But we're working on that. We also are really working to transform the maintenance of our parks. And while it's important for folks to have opportunity for recreation, it's also important that they have access to more natural spaces. And so we really do look at sort of managed natural areas. And in the Midwest, that means mostly we're talking about managed prairie, but also managed oak savanna. And we have increased the acres that we have under natural management. Since 2005, we started with about 800 acres, and we're at 1,750 acres. So it's almost 1,000 additional acres of natural management. Our goal is 40% by 2028 and 50% by 2035. And I won't lie, that's because of the benefits of nature, not just for humans, but also for the rest of the ecosystem. We're particularly concerned about pollinators. But it's also because it is actually a financial advantage for our management. If we do it right, it's better for our Parks Division budget. So I don't want to, it's not the motivating factor, but I don't want to discount the co-benefit of saving cities money. We also, of course, have a robust street tree program. We have over 100,000 street trees. In the past year, our Parks Division alone planted 1,000 street trees. This is a sort of geographically specific issue, but we've just gone through the emerald ash borer and taken down most of our ash trees and are in the replanting cycle for that. But we are working on, one of our challenges is our laws around street tree protection to make sure that private development doesn't impact them. And then, we are looking at how we can increase biodiversity of our street trees and manage for that as well. The final project I just want to touch on very briefly, Madison is blessed to be on an isthmus between 2 lakes. And one of the largest projects that we are currently embarking on is a complete revisioning of our Lake Monona waterfront. To re-green the waterfront and to increase access, particularly from underserved communities, to the water and the benefits of the water. So we're just in the planning stages, but I'm very excited about what that will mean for our community going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Simmons, turning to you for that same question. How is your city ensuring equitable access to nature and green spaces? And I know we had a wonderful conversation yesterday, so love to share what you're doing to the audience.
Yes, let me first begin by thanking, the Bezos Earth Fund. And when you think about Earth, you have to think about cities, because bottom-up climate action is where it is to make sure we protect the Earth's planet. Well, Greenville, Mississippi, you know, we had the most destructive flood that occurred in 1927, the Great Flood of 1927. And when we had that flood of 27, of course, you had the great migration of folks moving up the river. But it consisted of about, 7 states. But in Mississippi, black folks who were field hands were told to get on the top of the levee to act as sandbags to protect white landowner property. So after that flood occurred, we are now in 2023 with those same descendants of those black folks who are living right there near the Mississippi River. And so we're having the historic flood of 2019. We're having Hurricane Ida. These group of mayors on the Mississippi River have sustained over $250 billion in disaster losses. But of course you know that those black folks ain't living on beachfront property. So the Mississippi River presents an opportunity, but it also presents a hell of a challenge because there's water seepage that comes into these poor black neighborhoods. Some folks can't flush. We've done a great job in trying to get some federal money, but no one city, no one country, no one continent, no one river basin can do it alone. So we had to partner with a group of mayors on the Mississippi River at scale to see what nature-based infrastructure we could deploy to help reduce the risk to our folks in Greenville, Mississippi. And so it's 105 bipartisan mayors from the headwaters of the Mississippi, from Bemidji, Minnesota, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico and New Orleans, where Mayor Cantrell is, who's dealing with saltwater intrusion. So what we are doing, in COP27, we unveiled 66,000 acres of nature-based infrastructure with leading conservationists, Ducks Unlimited. Here at COP28, we are adding another 40,000 acres of nature-based infrastructure to sequester 230,000 tons of carbon. Now, why it's important? Critically, it's going to get President Biden 30% closer to his non-power sector NDC goals. Now, when we talk about how it's important, well, the Mississippi River Basin is unique because it's the world's largest food-producing river basin. 40% of folks consume commodities right on the river basin. 1 in 12 folks eat food right on the river basin. The freshwater economy of the Mississippi comprises of manufacturing, agriculture, and tourism, and generates $458 billion annually on the river. And it supports $1.3 million jobs. So we're talking about commerce, we're talking about trade, we're talking about climate performance, but more importantly, we're talking about the world's planet. And so what we've done is come together as a group of mayors to look to see what we can do to do these nature-based infrastructures. The good thing about methane release is that these lands will be placed in permanent conservation status, which will limit the methane release as well. So these projects are not only environmentally sound, but they're economically, developmentally great to the cities on the Mississippi River as well. So that's what we're doing at scale on the Mississippi River. My city, which is an 80% African-American population with a 38.6% poverty rate, the only really true way we can fix infrastructure or prevent the disaster and risk that happens is increasing water and sewer rates. And so the folks in my community got to decide whether they're going to pay a water bill or get food or medicine. And so the only way we can make sure that they live a better life is by working with these group of mayors, a bipartisan group of mayors, because when a hurricane comes, it's not red or blue. When a flood happens, it's not Democrat or Republican. We have to make sure we do for the world's people what we need to do. We're in the people business as mayors, and I impress upon Bezo, because I know you're already doing it by working with this great mayor, but I impress upon all of our world leaders to just give money to mayors and we can solve the world's problem.
Thank you, Mayor Simmons. I know our Equitable Urban Solutions Director thanks you immensely for that comment as well. It does remind me, and thank you both for your comments, it does remind me a friend of mine who's been working on climate justice and environmental justice for quite some time. We had a conversation, and we were both we're reflecting on where we're at and where we've been in this country. And knowing that the climate crisis is obviously the big existential crisis that we're facing, but knowing also that you cannot talk about the climate crisis without also talking about past economic, social, and other kinds of policies that have created the inequities that we see today. And so one of the things we were talking about was we need economic solutions, we need technological solutions, we need environmental and nature-based solutions, but we must pay attention to how those solutions integrate equity into their formation. Because at the end of the day, we need to know we do need to save the planet, but who are we saving the planet for? And hopefully we're saving it for everyone. So thank you for that, thank you for the comments. So now I'm going to turn to a couple of our Bezos Earth Fund grantees who come from the community side and who have been working relentlessly and have a whole legacy of community activism, both in their communities, but also as individuals who have been working on these issues for quite some time. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Smithers first and ask you, Ms. Smithers, to share with us a little bit about how you are working in your communities to bring green spaces to the people in your community.
Good morning, and thank you so much for that. In order to start, in order to give a sense of what we're doing, it's necessary, I think, to give context, to give a little history of the community from which I come. I come from a community called Dunleith, and Dunleith was a community that was built for African American World War II veterans, because during the time when these guys, my father included, came home from the war, there was no housing available to them, and housing deseg had not occurred. So a community was built for them, and it was a very interesting community because it was a community of all two-parent families, lots of kids, lots of wonderful, wonderful experiences. We had our own school. We walked to school. Our teachers lived in our community. It was totally integrated socio-economically. So I experienced a wonderful world growing up. That all changed with housing desegregation, because it gave other people who were more affluent in the community opportunities to move outside of the community. I need to just digress a minute to say that this was one community that was surrounded by all white communities. So we were one little community in the midst of all white communities. With desegregation, we were able to move out, and of course that moving out was accompanied by white flight. So this one community then became a whole corridor of predominantly African American homeowners. Naturally, there was disinvestment in the community. A number of things occurred. There was the drug dump. There was the the war on drugs. There were the young men who were coming home from Vietnam who were addicted to drugs. We had all kinds of problems, and of course, with the disinvestment of our county, it left us pretty much on our own. Over the time, there were those of us who decided that this community had given us so much. When we left, I left to go to college, undergraduate school, and then to graduate school, but it was my determination to return to this community, to do what I could to work to make it a better place, and the place that we had once had an opportunity to live in. I worked as in a number of professions, and I retired from education 13 years ago. And at that time, I dedicated my time to building resilience in our community. We started with an organization, Newcastle Prevention Coalition, and it was an organization that was populated by two old ladies, my friend and me. And my friend was the kind of person who walked and knocked on all of the doors, because in a low socioeconomic community, you don't have high tech. And so the way that we interacted with each other was to talk to each other. We developed a newsletter, and she walked and delivered this newsletter to every door along the Route 9 corridor. That was about 2,000 homes. And everyone got to know Miss Dora. On the other side, there was me. And I had to look for funding to see if we could find someone who would fund such an endeavor. They were not there. We had no idea what we were going to do, but ultimately, time and energy, we prevailed. We realized that our community suffered by every socioeconomic deprivation that there was. Social determinants of health, we were the poster child for that. And it especially impacted our young people who were graduating high school without being properly prepared for the future. It impacted the health of our residents. Because of zoning, industry was allowed to build close to our communities, so we had health issues. We had all of these things to deal with, and in addition to that, we had a large number of young men who had been incarcerated at some point in their lives so that it was impossible for them to gain gainful employment because everyone did a background check, and it did not matter how long ago the infraction had occurred, they would pay that price for the rest of their lives. We struggled, needless to say, and we developed programs with our organization. We developed a program that helped prevent our young people from being suspended from school. It was called the Alternative to Out-of-School Suspension Program. And so what would happen is that when a young person was suspended from school, they would go back to school that day. They would get a bag lunch. We pick them up. We bring them with us to ensure that they continue to do their work and that they don't fall behind. That was one program. Then we got some people certified as community health workers, and they went out into the community to find out what was the real need on the ground. And what they determined is that so many people did not know how to advocate for themselves. And then we had the environmental side. And the environmental side, we spent time advocating for cleaner air, working with organizations to prevent additional pollution. And we didn't know how we were going to continue this. But along came the Bezos Earth Fund. And oh my goodness, we were able to do so much in such a little time. First of all, we were able to provide gainful employment to a number of young men in our community, because what we found in the course of surveying the community was that in one community, people could not get out of their backyard because of overgrowth in the easement. And many of them had sewer issues. And the county was very willing to handle the sewer issues, but they couldn't get in. They said, we handle the sewer issues, but we don't clear easements and the down power lines. The utility company said, we'll be glad to fix the power lines, but we don't clear easements. So these residents were stuck with sewers sometimes backing up into their homes, with down power lines. One of the first things we did was to clear the easement. We were like angels. People couldn't believe it. They could actually get out their back fences. That was the first thing. We found ways of interacting with people and getting them to realize that they could be advocates for themselves. We provided opportunities for young men who never would have had opportunities to work. And they were so grateful. They are now out in their communities, knocking on the doors, delivering newsletters, and being registrars for people to learn to have an opportunity to vote. These are the kinds of things that happens when there are resources. We had the vision, we had the energy, we did not have the resources. We could not imagine that a grant from the Bezos Earth Fund would ever come our way, but it did. And now here we are. And we are so happy. I can just tell you, I can't thank the Bezos Earth Fund enough for what they have done for this community. And this is just the beginning. By the end of this grant, who knows where we will be? Look out, world, here we come.
Thank you so much, Ms. Smithers. We really deeply appreciate the work, and it's only because of people like Ms. Smithers and Anton that our resources can actually make a difference in the world. So it is with great honor that we partner with you on this. So Anton, I'm going to turn it over to you for the same question from President Biden's homeland to President Obama's homeland.
That guy, yes. Well, first, before I begin, I just, thank you all for inviting us here, representing the South Side of Chicago. Woo, that's right. Nothing like Chicago. In particular, nothing like Black Chicago, and nothing particular around the greater Inglewood community, which is Inglewood and West Inglewood, which is in the heart of Chicago on the South Side. I'm from a neighborhood just east of there called South Shore, but my family is from Inglewood. My grandmother, my grandfather all went and graduated from Inglewood with another famous Inglewood resident, which was Lorraine Hansberry, who graduated from Inglewood High School, who wrote A Raisin in the Sun. And so I have a deep history across many neighborhoods in Chicago. So I come to this work as an organizer, as an entrepreneur, as a philanthropist, as an activist. So I come with a lot of different stories and skills. And also as a filmmaker and a storyteller. And so for us, the journey really starts because the work that we've been doing, I first got involved through food systems work, through policy. I worked for Congressman Bobby Rush, who actually beat President Obama. So I was there for all of that action. So I have a whole nother story there. But it's interesting to see what has happened in the last 20 years as community voice has now become a lot more centered in driving some of the changes that have to happen in communities, as opposed to other kind of third-party groups coming into communities with resources or becoming, and it's not that it's always never been well-intended, but I think that there's a difference in terms of who drives the change. And so that's been our process over the last several years. The work that we've been really focused on at Grow Greater Inglewood, which we started as a coalition, was to make sure that there was a presence from Black farmers in a 95% Black community that has the highest rate of vacant lots in the city of Chicago. So one of the things that I won't go back to all the same poster child kind of, we're all on that same poster of the kind of, but I think the piece that I really want to highlight today is that not only was before there was white flight, there was the deindustrialization that happened across America. And that is what really started to shift many of the inner cities and the planning around cities. They become much more focused, the spatial deconcentration efforts of focusing on our downtown efforts, and neighborhoods kind of floundered as suburban areas start to grow. This is where we are now with America. And so when we start looking at a community like Inglewood that has a preponderance of vacant lots, a preponderance of all the things you talked about, violence and housing, closed schools. So when we start talking about environmental justice issues, it sometimes is super disconnected from the holistic part of the body. Like, where do I fit this in? Because people are in survival mode. So the language often, in terms of when we talk about greening a community, does not resonate in community because they don't know, like, greening, that's nice. And, however, I still have to work. But the greening piece is around just moving from these kind of, because we do believe that we deserve beautiful spaces. But we're not saying that in a more topical thing. We're talking about a real shift in terms of what humans deserve as a beautiful space. And if we don't fix that as a human village, then our children won't survive. That's what binds all of us, because these solutions can't be tied to a market. So to your point that you mentioned earlier, Andrew, which is that you can't build these kind of climate solutions and then they cost more to live near more green spaces. It's an oxymoron. So what we've kind of embarked on with our efforts right now in the last several years is through this agro-eco district that we've come up with, centered by the Inglewood Nature Trail. And across this trail is an abandoned railroad connector between two of America's largest railroads, Norfolk Southern on the eastern end and CSX on the western end. And this railroad that's elevated has sat abandoned for 60 years. The interesting thing, what nature always does, what humans can't quite ever duplicate, which is it does its thing. It reclaimed the space on its own. And so just above, all these social, terrible social determinants of health that are happening, there is this nature space that emerged just above with a huge tree canopy, whether it's invasive species, we got a lot of mulberries and oak trees, but it had already reclaimed itself. The birds and the bees had already begun doing what they do best. The mycelium had already been doing what it was doing best. And so what we came up with is that we needed to have a solution, because what had happened on the eastern end, these intermodal yards, commerce, the transportation, logistics, that space has grown tremendously. And so those yards had started to take over parts of the community, and there was a big fight around that. And so this trail became a way to say what the city needed to do. So that's where community groups like us is to kind of push the city and having the right language and not having it just top down to give the power to, I love you, mayors, but in a democracy, you work for the citizens. And then our job is to be not always confrontational with you, but to keep you accountable as well and to be able to push so that we can have the resources. But on the other end, we have to keep the community accountable as well. And that's been part of the ongoing process. So where we are now, what we've developed over the last several years, Go-Great Inglewood just started like less than 10 years ago. And we were really focused on regenerative farming in a lot of these urban spaces. And then also this nature trail. The nature trail then really took off in the post-pandemic. The city was awarded a $20 million raise grant. We leveraged almost $80 million for the trail. But the issue is that it's not just the trail. We can't just have a nice greenway and then all these vacant lots, no businesses. We need jobs. We need, we had to think about it in a much broader sense. So one of the things that that the real magic is that the answers are already there in the community. So using an asset-based approach, you can listen to the people who live closer to the problem and be able to provide a platform for them to take on leadership. That's my role. And that's the role of Grow-Great Inglewood. That's why we are there. And so what we've come up with is this kind of agro-eco district. How do we heal the land, through phytoremediation, through trees, through plants, through regenerative farming. But then also, how do we attract these green growing businesses? So I'm happy to be here because we're looking at also then how does this also implement, because there's all this vacant land, like where are the industries that can be in these vacant spaces that once had industry? We need jobs. Our community needs jobs, and it is the number one piece dealing with, a solid African-American and now growing Mexican-American community that need access to jobs in the green industry. But they are so far down the trajectory of why would I be on the most violent space known in the city of Chicago to bring jobs? So many of the larger corporations are not looking at our communities. They are bypassing to go to suburban areas, right? Where then our community said, well, we have jobs, but they would have to then commute miles. So that's one piece. The other big piece that we've been really working on is what we found across our community. We started the Backyard Gardens program. Many of our young people who we started this program, and this is where the Bezos Earth Fund is helping us kind of really create a whole core that we've called the Urban Earth Core at this point, is that in our community there was already, so we have an array of community gardens, but what we saw in the space is an opportunity for us to enhance what's already happening in people's backyards. Many of the baby boomers are now older. they knew how to farm, and the garden, they didn't always want to go to a community garden. So what we start doing is building raised beds, providing organic soil and starts, and then really replenishing the gardens and green spaces across the community. And this has become wildly popular because people now want their own backyard to be like, oh, I'm getting a nice, and we built raised beds so they can actually get up to the raised beds. So we had then an influx of young people that we were training in carpentry and agriculture, and then also that becomes a connection with folks as well. So we're on over 100 homes, and with this support that you guys have been doing, it's been really helpful to kind of move us forward.
Thank you, Anton.
I saw the hand. I was like, I got to make it, wrap this up.
I love being able to have power once in a while.
I saw it in the court. I was like, how about land this plane, Cecilia?
Very rare, but I can do it. Well, as you've heard, there is great interconnection, and when we're talking about green spaces from a community perspective, particularly communities that have been under assault, a number of social, economic, and other kinds of stressors, that it's very intersectional, it's very holistic, and it's very comprehensive. To Anton's point, you can't just talk about greening spaces. And to Ms. Smithers' point, you need to talk about the youth, the workers, right? Infrastructure, et cetera. All of those things are an integral part to how we think about green spaces in vulnerable communities. So to the mayors, I would, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple of minutes to talk. We are in an unprecedented time in terms of the amount of federal investments that are coming into state and cities at the moment. Could you talk a little bit about how you see using that federal money or philanthropic money to work with community leaders to build a common vision and a common agenda in your cities?
I can truly say that we want to most definitely tilt our heads to the Biden-Harris administration for the historic federal investments, whether it's bipartisan infrastructure and also the IRA. We've now begun to look at EV charging stations, and we are engaging our youth to that point. We've worked with, people don't know, but Mars Food subsidiary, Ben's Original, is in Greenville, Mississippi. The 90-second rice is only made in Greenville, Mississippi. And so farm to fork, our port serves over 2,000 farmers. But Mars has also assisted us in that youth perspective in providing food course service members to our elementary schools to teach our youth, the sugar content, the salt content, with health disparities that we're facing, because the Mississippi Delta has a high incidence of diabetes and hypertension, and so we're trying to make sure that our folks eat better. And so we're using corporate money with that. But with the bipartisan infrastructure stuff we're doing, green spaces. We did get a congressionally designated spending from Senator Wicker to do a green space that's going to be down the way in our city hall, in our downtown. And so we're looking at the bipartisan infrastructure law. We also are using that to do a freight corridor. We are right there on the Mississippi River. Of course, we use the barges, but also we have a bridge that takes you right across to Arkansas, Lake Village. And trucks were going through the city, and we had about 8 fatalities going through the city. And so we're creating a 15.6 mile freight corridor that's going to take it on the outskirts of the city to protect the city, and we've been using federal funds for that. It's a total $142 million project. So thanks to those funds, we're able to do that. But I do have to be real about the equity piece. Cities like Greenville and smaller cities are having a financial strain right now with these large-scale funding vehicles, all right? And so it's always this 80-20, 80-20. And it's hard for a city like Greenville, Mississippi to make the match. Now, we can get sewer revolving fund money to make the match. We can get some other funding to make the match. But right now, we are having a major financial strain. I have a letter in Washington now. It's because we are having budget cuts and looking at laying people off because these small cities, when we talk about equity, that are in dire need of these funds are less equipped to get these funds. In closing, in Greenville, Mississippi, You know, in the Mississippi Delta, we got mayors that come to work just twice a month to their board meetings. And their insurance is provided by the company that they work for. So they have employees working that don't even have health insurance that work for the city. So we need direct money. This formula money is good. It's great. And we want to thank them for that. But we need direct money to match these large-scale funding vehicle, and we need more than technical assistance to survive and build sustainable communities. So I thank you for the money. That's great. But we need to begin to refocus that rubric around climate, around poverty, around disadvantaged neighborhoods, and it needs to be in there. You know, we know that environmental justice is in there, and we want to thank Biden-Harris for making sure equity now is going across the board in the agencies. But I'm telling you right now, what we're feeling, it is not enough.
Thank you for that. That's a very important point. Mayor
Yeah.
Rose Conway?
I mean, I just wanted to lift up everything that you said, Mayor. I think that's right. You know, and I also wanted to lift up what both of you said about how if you come in just with the word green, you know, you might not get very far in a community because, you know, our communities are facing many of the same struggles around housing and affordability and access to jobs. So I want to talk a little bit, and I should say also thank you to the Biden administration. Madison has received a lot of funding around a number of different issues. And we have done historically and are continuing to do a number of programs that are engaging particularly young people, but workforce development more broadly in the sort of broader green space. And so one, just to briefly mention, we train apprentices to install solar panels, to install EV charging, to swap out LED lights, to green our building stock, and to prepare those folks for good jobs in the green economy and in, you know, particularly in solar installer jobs. Now, we'd rather they stay work for the city, but if that's what they want to do, they're well prepared to go out into the economy. But a program that we've actually had for even longer is a partnership with a community-based organization that trains particularly, I hate the word, but disconnected youth, whatever that means, and gets them into construction trades. And that's where they started. They started with rehabbing houses, building houses, and they have since expanded into conservation. And so they now train folks to do work in conservation lands. We work with them in our conservation parks. And my hope is that as we build out more green infrastructure, that we can continue to work with them to manage and maintain that green infrastructure. We've embarked in a partnership with our county and with this organization to help us plant more, to grow more of the trees that we plant locally, so that young people can have that experience of literally growing a tree and then planting it themselves, and to get paid for that at the same time. So, you know, one of the challenges that we have as we look at more green infrastructure, particularly green infrastructure for stormwater management, is how are we going to maintain that green infrastructure? And so I think it's imperative that we're training young people to do that work and to take those jobs. And so we're trying to do our part in Madison for that. The last thing I just want to lift up very briefly, for those of you who are not at the local Climate Action Summit at the beginning, was that the beginning of this week? I don't even know what day it is. I think possibly the most powerful thing I've heard yet at this COP was from Mayor Claudia Lopez, Bogota, Colombia. And she said, she was talking to mayors, but I think it applies to everybody. She said, care for your people so they can participate in your democracy and build a strong democracy, and so that you can have government that can care for your environment. And I just want to loop it right back around, because if we're not caring for our people, we've got nothing. So that's my charge to all of you. Care for your people, care for your democracies, and care for your environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hear, hear. Yes. I think what both of you have also pointed out is policy design and the policies, having come from the administration, are critical and important. They're the pathway in. They're the leading pathway in. But we cannot forget about the implementation side. That policy is half the battle, and then we've got to get to work and do implementation. So thank you so much for that. I am going to turn it over. We just have a short amount of time, so maybe just for Ms. Smithers and Anton, 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would have either to elected officials or to philanthropy in terms of what needs to be done to continue to bring equitable and just solutions to your communities. Ms. Smithers?
Well, I would say, first of all, have the community at the table. When policy is being formulated, it's usually with the best of intentions, but it's with very little knowledge about what is actually going on at the ground level. Representatives from the community must be present in order to have effective policy. That would be the first thing. Secondly, I can only speak from my community, but I'm sure it's across the board. Resources are imperative. One of the problems that we had where I am is that in order to get a state grant, the state grants are reimbursement grants. So if you're a small organization with no money, how on earth are you going to use a reimbursement grant? So we have to look at those policies that impact people. And expertise. Small communities need access to experts who can help to guide them through the treacherous waters of grant seeking and implementation and that kind of thing, and assessment of the effectiveness of programs. Length of time. Grants need to be longer than 1 year. This problem was not created in a year, and it won't be resolved in a year. So why on earth are small agencies expected to resolve a problem in a year? 2 years, better. 5 years, even better, because you need that time to assess the problem, to develop your strategies, to implement them, and then reevaluate how effective you are.
I think for government, I would say there's a few things. One is to be able to really lean into co-governance with communities, frontline communities in particular, because that's power sharing. That's really difficult for elected officials, and it's a thing that we're doing. So more of that. You need more co-governance where you take on that so that communities can help implement and rethink about structures that are created from government. That's usually money is coming to governments, but then how it gets deployed into cities becomes a real challenge in terms of then who actually gets that resource. For philanthropy, I think it's reconfiguring the framework. You can use trust-based philanthropy to your point of having resources deployed right into community. I think that's, you need more of that. But I think at the board level of a lot of the trustees who sit on that, we have to think about that there is an abundance mindset. That if we're talking about climate, that the sun has not quit on us a day yet for all of us humans. So this notion that there's scarce resources to fix what we need to do does not make sense. So what I think one of the big charges is to think about the what ifs of how do we reframe and rethink about what resources are really needed, and a commitment as the guiding star, and not necessarily the return on the impact or a story that we can tell as philanthropists, because that's not what we're in it for. So I think the long-term piece is to really think about the kind of commitment it takes to fund, to address these issues will take a generation, and that's okay. So if it's $400 million, so to get away from some of the numbers, right? Because that becomes the moniker. It's like, that's a lot of money. But those, $400 million is not the same it was even 5 years ago. So, and that's the real thing that's happening. Because it's not really just the money. So I think, especially around climate, because we're looking at our future. So those are the things I would say is that for government, more co-governance, more voices at the table, sharing power, and for philanthropy, really reconfiguring how you deploy and use your corpuses, how you're really like funding communities, how you're funding, and then organizing around that. I think there's a real potential there.
Thank you, Anton.
Thank you.
Well said. So I'm going to ask Angie Fife, Executive Director of ICLEI, to come up and close us out. Can we please have a round of applause for our panelists?
Thank you so much. What an inspiring panel. I also want to acknowledge that we would not have the Inflation Reduction Act were it not for a coalition that was built with environmental justice organizations. That bill never would have passed without the work that you've done and other environmental justice organizations. So thank you very much for your work. So I'm going to take 2 minutes to try to connect us up now to the global work. Believe it or not, a year ago I was at COP. It was COP 15. It was the biodiversity COP in Montreal. So I've had 2 COPs in 1 year. Imagine that. And in Montreal, what we did was we brought together the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It's called the Kunming Montreal Biodiversity Framework because the original COP was scheduled for 2020 in Kunming, China. Obviously didn't happen. So we came together in Montreal last year. We put together a new global biodiversity framework. That framework includes explicitly local governments. It includes explicitly targets for urban areas. And it connects very nicely to the work that the Biden-Harris administration has done around our U.S. work, specifically America the Beautiful Challenge, which is a challenge to communities to set aside, conserve, and restore 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. That is the same target that is in the global biodiversity framework. So the work that you're doing at the neighborhood, the work that you all are doing at the city, we're doing at a national level, we're doing at a global level, and it all fits together. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. Have a great COP. Take care.